Hey guys, it's Dreamforce here. You know they say that every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, God kills a kitten? Well, this is Thorin's channel. And every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, Thorin kills a seagull.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Reflections, and my guest for this one is going to be Soe or Soembie. I don't know which one the official term is at the moment, but basically she is a veteran of esports, been around many different esports games for a long time. I think we're talking, what would you say it is now, like 15 years or something? 10 years?
17 actually.
17, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So actually, one thing I want to ask about is normally in interviews, I'm not this guy, I don't particularly like the whole origin story because everyone has the same origin story usually. But in your case, I actually would be interested to know. You were in esports very early on. I mean, that's only like 3 or 4 years after I began, and I'm supposed to be like super ancient before everyone else. So what was the impetus to get specifically into the industry part of esports? Like, what did you like about that, or what was drawing you into it?
Honestly, it was very random because I wasn't really aware of the fact that there is an industry, because quite frankly, back then there wasn't really. Sure. I mean, there kind of was, but not the same scale as we have it today. I essentially just did the online radio stuff, and I was playing video games, and we talked about video games during like those online radio bits, and just played music pretty illegally, I think, back then. Okay. So like some Winamp playlists, you know. Sure. So that's kind of what we did, and that was my hobby. I just kind of dropped into that by accident in IRC because someone in my channel back then like did the thing, and then he invited me, and then I just became part of that thing. And on top of that, in my real life, I did some internship at a radio station as well, and I just so happened to go on air one single time they let me on air, because I was really just there to do editorial work and bring coffee. But some of the moderators couldn't like make the show, and they asked me to just jump in for one like single segment, and so I did. And he asked me about my weekend, and I just went on about ESWC, esports, right, gaming, just went on a complete rant, and he was like, shut the fuck up, like I don't want to hear any of that, like that's weird. So he just tried to shut me off. Lucky for me though, the right person was listening to that very segment at the right time, and then I got contacted afterwards and asked if I want to do stuff in gaming, and lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I packed my bag and moved to Germany to do that for a living. So I really just dropped into it. That wasn't really a goal of mine. I, in fact, wanted to become a professional player, if that was ever a thing back then. But yeah.
What game would it have been in? What game was your game back then? Quake? Okay.
Yeah, Enemy Territory and Quake were my two main games. Mainly Quake. So I played in every LAN tournament I could possibly imagine. We always dropped out first, but that also meant that back then, when you drop out first, you're the one to commentate on the rest of the tournament. As that was just kind of a thing. So yeah, I got early start in casting that way, by just sucking at the game.
Because that was one thing I would be interested to know in your case, which is whenever I think of the early days of esports, I often tell people it was obviously way less cool, because back then you were like a nerd within a sphere of nerds. Like even people who played general video games sort of almost looked down on us in esports. Like we were the real weirdos and they were like the semi-cool ones or something. So what I would actually like to know in your case is, the funny thing is, way back in the day, you'll know this, like famously, if you went to a big LAN party, if there was a woman there or a girl, there'd be like one or like two, or it was already someone's girlfriend. So what I would wonder in your case is, it would be easy back then for everyone to imagine that because you're the one girl in the big room, like everyone's being super lovely to you. But actually, it sounds like you also were getting sort of like, not necessarily hated on, but sort of dismissed for being a gamer or something.
Yeah, it put me in a weird spot, because I wasn't cool for the cool kids because I liked video games. But then I wasn't really cool for the video game nerds because they acted like I don't belong there either. Cause
right.
Like, you just immediately you get quizzed. That's always the weird thing. Like I come in and I was like, hey, we have a shared interest. That's awesome. And they're like, oh yeah, well then tell me all about this and that. And why do you quiz me? Like I'm not quizzing you and like doubting your knowledge about DM16 like weapon spawn spots. Like I don't know what you want from me. So it was kind of a weird spot. Obviously in the early days you would get quote-unquote advantages, because people would treat you differently. You would get invited to more things, and like, you know, you would play with pro players because you were a girl and they tried to get in your fans probably. Sure. And I don't know, they were like, yeah, sure, you can like do a queue with me, like, you know, like that kind of stuff. And naive me didn't really think anything about it. It was like, oh, that's so nice, they're so nice to me, that's so sweet. But then they make advances and you're like, oh, okay, I see how it is. I mean, I was like 16 when I started, you know, like really being in the scene, and I just didn't see it for quite some years. That's why I'm getting special treatment. And then I got into a lot of situations where people would expect something back because, well, I play with you, so now clearly we're a thing.
Sure.
I was like, oh no, that's not. So it was a lot of awkward situations early on, until you weren't the only woman in the room anymore, so you weren't the center of attention. So kind of was able to like step away from that.
I want to actually ask early on in the interview so we can set the ground rules in, and we'll move on and talk about other topics as well later. Essentially, on that aspect, the idea of like, you see a woman in esports, like women in esports, like what are their roles? I actually want to ask you just straight up at the beginning of the interview, do you think it should be a topic when someone talks to someone like you? Do you take offense to it? Is it crowbarred in too much? What's your take on that angle? Like, would you like there to be an interview that doesn't ever mention it?
Yeah, see, I go back and forth on that one for quite some years, actually. I just straight up said when someone wanted to do the interview, if you ask anything about me being a woman in the industry, like, just I'll literally walk out of the interview because I can't answer it anymore. It's just every single time the same question. I'm always going to have the same answers. Like, I don't know me talking about it is not really going to change it. But my stance on that has kind of changed because I do think that I guess you have to talk about it. Like, you can't not address it because it doesn't go away if you don't address it either. I do think, however, now luckily it's not the same conversation anymore like back then, you know? Like back then it was completely different. Now, even in my own work, like I'm surrounded by kick-ass women, like front of the camera, behind the camera. Like we have women in almost every single position there is in an esports broadcast. So I don't think it's quite the same conversation anymore. I think you can have a conversation about how women are still being perceived, about what some of the reactions are, and how double standards are still very much a thing. And sexism is absolutely still quite as rampant as it was back then. But it's not about, oh, women, there is no women. Like that's not a thing anymore. There are definitely a lot of women, much more than some of the people watching esports might actually be aware of.
Oh, there's loads. Especially the joke is the industry part of it. They're incredibly represented. Yeah, maybe among players, not as many, of course. Yeah, there's people who are just casuals. Who knows what the divide is? But I agree, the industry is women are ubiquitous, of course. It's just part of the esports industry. Because what I want to ask was this: since I know you will have been asked about these topics a million times, I think I have my own perspective on these questions. Also, one thing I would like to ask initially, I sort of set it up there. Since you are an actual proper OG in esports, you're not just someone who even, like nowadays, even people who've been around for 5 years call themselves a veteran. Like you actually were there 17 years ago. As I say, you must have a really different perspective on like the esports space, men in the esports space, what is a gamer and stuff, right? So do you think you have a different perspective than people who are joining the industry now, man or woman?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people who are joining now, they take everything for granted. Like we kind of, I feel like we all did the grunt work. Like back in the days, I built the stage I hosted on, you know, I casted on. Like, literally, I set down booths. I was doing the lighting on the rigs. I was climbing up, doing banners. I was, like, hammering down walls. There's pictures of me, like, literally building booths.
It used to be a famous thing, especially with the ESL I know you worked with. At the end, everyone took the scaffolding down and stuff like that.
Everyone had to help because we didn't have the budget to, like, bring in extra crew for that. So we would spend 2 weeks prior to the event building the event. So by the time the event came around, I looked like I was bruised and covered in scrapes because I just like did like all that manual labor. And back in the days, like I wouldn't have a hotel room. We would sleep like in weird kind of like hostels, like all together, cramped in rooms. Like I shared rooms with like people I don't even know, male and female. Like that was what it was. And I mean, obviously that was okay with me because like that was my passion. I was like, that's what you got to do. These days people get upset that they don't have 2 like queen size beds in their hotel rooms. I'm like, what the heck? I still marvel at it. I still walk into a hotel room and feel like, oh my God, I have my own room. Like that's incredible. So I think there's a lot more appreciation for where we're at right now, which you can tell when you're at an event, like the quote unquote younger talent. They get more impatient about stuff when things don't go right. Like they have more difficulties with technical issues. They got more frazzled much more quicker because they didn't get trialed by fire like the OG crew where we had to go through everything, do everything ourselves. Like I mean, having a production and everything that wasn't that wasn't a big thing. Like we had G Arena, like we did it our own. Like having observers as a mega luxury right now. So yeah, I think from that perspective, I am much more appreciative and in awe of where esports is right now because I have that direct comparison to what it was back then.
As you said earlier, obviously you got all the old classics, like so you see you're a gamer, then name like all 17 levels of whatever, yeah, as you say, like the classic one, right? But also, as you say, when you joined the industry as well, there weren't many women in it, so I'm sure there were loads of people where initially they showed interest, but it turns out it was just for one very reductive reason, or they thought they'd sleep with you, or even just they want some female attention, who knows what reason. But what I would want to ask is this: when do you think the industry side, though, sort of ticked over and you felt accepted? Because I would say in the modern day, to me, like the ignorant comments generally, it's just like, it's like you'd imagine the 15-year-old kid who's just joined esports, he just plays the game or what. It's usually among the industry people, like we all know each other, we've all been around years now. I feel like surely people feel accepted in the industry, right?
I think for me, it's that the more women joined, which were, this is going to sound, it's actually going to sound kind of fucked up, to be honest, what I'm about to say now. It might offend some people, but the more, I want to put that in quotation marks, the more illegitimate women joined, the more the legitimate women were appreciated, because they started hiring so many women who like had no idea about gaming. They just like added random hosts, which is great. Like I'm sure they're great at just hosting, but they weren't aware of the material. They weren't aware of the game, of the community and all those things. So I think that direct comparison, to listen to those kind of females joining the scene, if you then compare it to the OG females who are in the scene who really, really understand the game, they play them, they live them, they're just as much a fan as anyone else in gaming. I think that really helped because it made people really appreciate that, like, oh no, like they actually know what they're talking about. That said, though, when I started off, like no matter how good I was still being questioned. It was still like, oh, she doesn't know what she talked about. Like I was high ranked in StarCraft 2 when I casted it, yet people would still act like I basically have no idea what the game is all about, which is really frustrating because there's no winning those people over. They just made up their mind. But then again, in direct comparison to people who actually don't know what they're talking about, that made me look more legit. So that did help, actually, which is awful, but yeah, I guess.
I see the angle what you mean there, though, and obviously when you say illegitimate, you just mean in the sense that like they weren't authentic gamers. They were just there because it was a gig or their agent got them or something. Yeah, of course.
Illegitimate is probably the wrong word.
No, I knew what you meant.
I don't know.
It's all good. Because another thing along these lines is one thing that people never get asked about who are women, is I'd be really interested to know this as well, is it's not as simple as everyone who gives their opinion publicly is always doing it totally of their own accord. Like I've known a lot of women in the industry who felt pressured actually to comment on every big political and social topic, or maybe someone says something and then you have the person nudging you like, well, you've got to say something about that. Do you ever feel like people want you to be like a billboard for like women in esports or anything?
All the time. It's very exhausting, actually, because a lot of time they think that you only care and you only are doing something when you're like tweeting about it or whatever. They don't understand that those tweets, that kind of stuff, that I'm preaching to the choir. My followers know what I'm all about. Like of course they're gonna agree, except from the few trolls who follow me just to disagree with stuff. We all have some of those, but like it is about what you're doing behind the scenes, like how you elevate other, females or any other gender who's trying to break into, or a diverse person who's trying to break into the industry. Like there is a lot which goes on behind the scenes which people don't see, and I don't need to make it public that I'm working my ass off to like be inclusive and help people to get a foot into the door. I because I don't do it for the public approval. I do it because I believe in the cause and I want to give people a chance. I want to help people. I don't need to tweet about it because I don't care what people see or what they don't see. But yeah, they do use that as a, oh well, you didn't speak out about it, therefore you don't care. That's not how it works, unfortunately, or fortunately.
So Another thing I also wanted to ask along those lines was, right, there's no way to say this without it sounding like I'm having a dig at him, which I'm not, because he's actually someone I like and have known for many years, which is obviously Too Good, who is a mutual acquaintance of ours. Right, if people don't know, a long time ago, basically a lifetime ago now, you and Too Good used to date. I mean, look, he's made it public enough at this point in time. We can't really avoid it, right? So what I would ask is this. I'll have to frame it this way because it'll be funny as well. So what I'm going to ask is this, right? Obviously, in the modern day, I don't agree with this, but a lot of people will be triggered by Too Good and things he said in the past. I'm sure if he says something now, he'll say something that'll upset some people. Essentially, what I would ask is this. If someone didn't know who Too Good was, or they think there's a certain type of gamer who's edgy and, you know, they say naughty jokes, or they've in the past said things that wouldn't be considered PC now, how would you explain to someone who's new to esports, like, these sorts of figures? Like, is that someone, for example, like, is the Too Good of old? Was he a mean guy? Was he a bad guy? Was he going across the line? How would you explain it? Because like I said, the people who want to hold you up as the billboard, I'm sure some of them don't even know about that background. So I just wonder, what do you think of that whole aspect? Because to me, he's in some way the poster boy of like being a bit edgy, right? And being the gamer who's definitely willing to say a spicy joke.
Yeah, see, that's the thing though. I think once you actually work with those people, you realize that not everything which is being said online is said because it's like full-on conviction. A lot of it is just steering the pot and there's part of a brand. And yeah, some of it is obviously crossing a line. A lot of that is too offensive for my taste. So I'm not going to go out and like approve of what some people say and how people react to it. I mean, same goes for you, Thorin, right? Like, not everyone agrees with the way you...
Some would say many disagree, but yeah, I agree.
They might very heavily disagree, or like similar, you know, like some people just don't like the way he talks about things. And the same goes for Too Good, who I guess he started that trend early. But I love that guy still. Like, we dated, their split up was absolutely horrible. But he's a good man, and he's a genuine great person, and most of the things he says is coming from a good place because he wants change to happen.
Yes.
So sure, he's not always going about it the right way, but I have nothing but love for him still, and for basically anyone else in the industry. Like, I think a lot of people are being portrayed as the baddies. That's just because we need a baddie, right?
Of course,
you need a villain. Every industry needs a villain. So like, some of those villains, I've known them for way too long and I've worked with them way too close that I can agree with the public perception. So I'm just not going to say anything publicly about it, because I know exactly if I'm like publicly siding with them or going against them, then like I'm just going to get thrown in the fire as well. So I just...
of course.
Stay away from it. A lot of them are my friends though, so if someone were to say something to my face, like I'll defend them to my death, because I know that they're good people, right?
Oh, I definitely agree with the sentiment, by the way. Like, that's another thing I think gets lost in all these like public like witch trials, as it were. Is like, is the person actually someone who cares about esports? Like, have they done things where they show they care? Do they want the industry? Because I would totally agree with what you said about Too Good. If someone sat down and had a beer with Too Good, he would tell you all sorts of things that like aren't just edgy. Like, he actually wants to change and improve the industry, and this person's got to go here. Like, so what I would ask is this: you touched on it there, but another thing that's happened in the modern day, especially around any topic around men, women, gender, is this idea that like everyone collectively has to like agree with the people and defend them, or like totally disavow them and sort of like they're denounced in the whole community. Whereas it seems like your take's sort of like they're them and I'm me, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Because the thing is, like, if someone has really strong opinions, I'm not gonna change those opinions. Like, let's be real, like, we're just people in the internet. Like, I'm not gonna start a fight over random strangers on Twitter, because there's no winning. They have their opinion. No one's gonna read my defensive or aggressive tweet and go like, oh, she got a good point. Like, I'm gonna take that into account. Like, that is so rare to happen. Like, almost never would that actually happen. So I think people are coming in because it's so anonymous in a way that they're gonna have their opinion, and they're going to stick to them, and they're going to defend them, and it's a weird hill to die on. Like, I don't want to have to use up my energy, which I can spend for way more important things, to like fight those kind of fights. I just surround myself with people that I feel comfortable with, that I know that we are on the same wavelength. I don't have to agree with everything they say, because I just generally don't think you need to agree with everything in terms of your friends. Like, obviously, like some basic rules, like, and standards you should have. Like, I'm not going to agree with a racist or with like a sexist or something. Like, I would be like, okay, like, that's not the person I want to surround myself with. But it also doesn't mean I have to go out of my way to like hunt them down somewhere. I don't want to spend that energy. I think my course of action is just going to ignore their existence and live my life.
Because if people don't know, this is where, by the way, anyone who only vaguely knows you is actually probably going to be shocked by this next topic, because I've set it up as though you're just any random woman who works in industry with, you know, similar thoughts. Yeah, I agree with all like the right messages and stuff. But one thing that actually I remember a few years ago, I vividly remember this, which was quite shocking actually. I remember when on the like International Men's Day, or was it even Women's Day? One of the two. You did like a really, I mean, it would actually sadly be called edgy, but I thought it was a really cool tweet. You did a tweet where basically it was like, on this day, I actually want to point out like all the cool men in the space who've like helped people and been allies and brothers and, you know, uncles. You had a whole like sort of thing. And I remember, unfortunately, even though you were trying to do it, I got the vibe like it's sort of like a unifying message for esports. It seems like you were like the person of the day who got hated on the internet, right? People were pretty harsh.
Oh yeah, I got death threats for that one. Like that got escalated quite badly. Actually, we had to get lawyers involved. It was pretty severe. Like it was like some actual newspapers reporting on it. All I did in that tweet, for those who didn't see it, was as you said, like I wanted to thank the men in my life who always treated me the right way. And quite frankly, since it's International Women's Day, you'd think that the woman can do whatever the fuck she wants.
Sure, that's a good angle. Yeah, true.
That's right. Like, that's my day to thank whoever I want. So, like, how dare you canceling my way of like appreciating my day? But I just thought it's an important message, because I feel like it's very on topic here, like with the current, I guess, political affairs in the US where I currently live. It's just the pendulum swings too far to either side.
Right.
I think you can be a feminist without having to hate every man. Like, same as like, you know, like you don't have to have such a strong alignment that you literally just like go full circle and then you are actually the other side. And I feel like that was kind of happened in that very moment. So I felt it was really important to point out that there's a lot of good people who want you to succeed, no matter your gender. And I am very lucky that I grew up with my grandpa, who always treated me exactly like my brother who always treated me like one of the boys. Like, he beat me up if I had to. He didn't care about my girl. Okay. Like, yeah, it was just, I was just equal to him, and that helped me so much growing up, and it helped me in my current field as well, because I never got treated differently. So that was never even anything, like there was no barrier in my head to think that I can't do it because I'm a woman. That didn't even occur to me until someone in the community would point it out. It's like, but you're a woman. I was like, yeah, that's strange. Why would you bring that up? So I'm lucky in that regard, because I wasn't really attacked prior to heading into the industry. So I wasn't scared of going in.
I mean, one thing you say there that actually, I feel like this is something I've noticed as a trend, is a lot of people who try to be like the voice of reason in that case. I mean, little Susie, if people don't know, another super old school veteran, she's done it many times and also had a similar response. You get the people who are the other side of extremists attacking you. I've noticed, for me, the trend is, I can understand totally why some women might actually be very vitriolic to men. Maybe they've had really bad relationships with men. Maybe they've had one recently that's in their mind when they think about it. I get that angle, but at the same time, I've always noticed the trend the other way, which is the women who actually just seem very cool in that sense. It's not a problem. A lot of them have had good relationships with men in their lives. That's the thing. They can sort of see the positives, and they can see that in the industry, right? Because it does feel like a lot of people, like there's certainly a lot of problems in esports. I've even done videos myself where I actually interviewed a whole load of women behind the scenes about what are the specific cases of sexism you faced, and then, you know, in the industry, often fans, casual aspects. But the problem is with all these topics is like the extremes on either side, it's like you say, they don't want to hear it. They don't want a real discussion. They just want to sort of pick their target for the day, fire all the nukes, and then, I don't know, wake up tomorrow and pick another target somewhere, right? It doesn't feel like there's a lot of real discourse happens. Yeah.
No, and it's really frustrating because it always has to be so extreme. It's always black and white, and that's just not how humankind is. There is no such thing as black and white. Like there is, and as you say, like a lot of women who are so aggressive about it, they might have real good reason. They might have had like so many bad interactions that I'm not gonna like discount that or discredit that. Like, I have full sympathy and empathy for that. Like, I had a rough upbringing myself. Like, I understand. Like, I really, really do. But I don't think that the way to achieve what you want to achieve in this very case is going to be achieved by just attacking the other side. Like, that's not how you start a conversation. That's not how you make change. And it's really not how you become happy, because quite frankly, I think hating takes a lot of energy, so much more than trying to like give people the benefit of the doubt. Because yeah, there's a lot of sexism I face still, but oddly enough, more often than not, like especially when it comes to like direct like co-workers and whatnot, the sexism I face there very often is like unbiased kind of like or unconscious kind of sexism.
Right.
Like it's not necessarily always coming from a bad place. So I think we have to sometimes take a step back and like look at the bigger situation. Like, what is the background of that person? Why would the person say that? Why did this feel the way it feels to me? I think there's a lot of good conversations to be had if you just kind of take a moment and listen and really think about it.
Before we go on and talk about the games, though, one last question on this topic, because it'll tie into some of the real life stuff we can talk about at the end of the interview, which is, are you someone, because I've noticed actually, like people like Little Susie will just overtly even say it, like they call themselves like the mom of the team or the casters, they use that. Obviously now you are literally a mother. Do you feel like you have, in this sense, do you have a maternal instinct towards esports as a whole, the people in it, the industry?
I like to think of myself like the funny aunt.
Okay.
All right. I just show up to the party. I'm not getting too involved with everything. Okay. That's how I steer away from drama, because I don't want that in my life. I had enough of that growing up. So I'm just trying to like, you know, do what I love and not get beaten down doing so. But yeah, like I definitely have a lot in it. Like it does feel like family to me. So it is meaningful. So for me, like if I see a community doing really bad or a game doing really bad, like it hurts me. Like I want them to succeed. I hate when games are being discontinued. Like you have a Heroes of the Storm situation or something like that. You know, like that hurts, because I know that it's the livelihood of so many people. It's their passion. It's their life. And if I see like big drama happening with like different companies around the globe, or you know, like when an esports thingy gets shut down, or like we can't do events, or there's something bad happening at an event, like I really feel for it. It does hit home, even if it's a different kind of community. Like it still hits me, because I've just been there from the get-go. It's family.
Since in the early days, I mean, you alluded to it, like you were going to Germany, working with the ESL and that group of companies. There's only a few companies back then. Everyone knew the internal industry people, right? At the time you were doing that, how soon was it where you actually thought, like, it's not about the amount of money. When did you actually think, like, this is a real job? Like, I actually might be doing this for a while now. Because I know a lot of people, it's kind of like, for some of us, maybe even still, they think esports could end tomorrow. But back then especially, no one knew how long any of these games would last. Like, would Quake going to be replaced tomorrow? Was Counter-Strike the new game? Was StarCraft? It was changing all the time. So when did you actually get the sense of, like, this is a real job?
So I think I got my first real event experience was in 2007, like really early in 2007. And back then it still felt like, is this a real thing? Like, am I actually doing a real job, or am I just like bumming around having a great old time? Like, I really wasn't sure. And I don't think that changed for quite some years. In fact, after the first 2 or 3 years of like casting in esports, back then I casted, I wasn't hosting. After the first few years, I was so worried about this not actually being a legitimate job, like, because I didn't know, like, are there going to be more events? Like, is there something for me to do tomorrow? Like, I don't know. So I started actually studying media design, digital and print conception visualization. So I got a degree whilst also working full-time in esports, because I just needed something to like fall back on if I needed. So that's how unsure I was. So I guess it took about 6 years of my career almost until I felt like, oh no, like I think I made it. Like I actually make a living out of it. It wasn't much back then, but I can afford my one room with some other people in an apartment. So like that will do, I guess.
Since, if people don't know, you actually originally originate from Switzerland. Yeah. How were you actually managing financially back then? Didn't people back home think you were crazy doing this gig for peanuts, basically?
Oh yeah, I mean, the reason why I'm not living in Switzerland is because even now on my current salary, I don't think I could actually live in Switzerland on that salary, because just the cost of living over there is so much higher. Like you need a proper normal job with a Swiss salary in order to like be able to afford that. That's why there is no such thing as like big Swiss esports teams, because
True.
you can't afford that full time. It's just not possible over there. You can't sustain that. I think because the way I didn't grow up like with my family or anything in a normal sense, so I didn't really have that tie-in. So I didn't really have anyone to like hold me back and tell me that this is a stupid idea.
Okay. Would it have do you think it would have dissuaded you? Would it have had any effect, do you think?
Maybe it would have been different, because I mean, I was quite young when I moved. I was 17 years old and I just packed my bags and moved to a different country. Like, that's quite a step for a 17-year-old with absolutely nothing to fall back on. But because I had nothing, I wasn't really, like, there was nothing to lose. I was just like, well, we're going to do that. And if that doesn't work out, then I'm still where I started, right? Like, so it didn't really matter that much to me, I guess. It was a bit of a, oh, well, let's see how it goes. My brother, who's my very best friend and my entire world and my family, he was very supportive of it. He was just like, yeah, you go, you do what you love, and like, doesn't matter. My grandparents, they just didn't understand what I'm doing. I'm pretty sure they were convinced that I'm doing porn, actually, for the first few years, because I moved away to do movies in the internet. That's how they understood it.
Oh, I see, right. And you were making a bit of money, sure.
Yeah, and the only thing they knew about the internet were like certain things. So I guess they were just disappointed.
Okay. Obviously only on that angle, yeah, of course. Right, one thing I would ask is this. Since you said originally your original game was Quake, you're actually one of the only people I can ask this question of, because the joke in the modern day is, like, in the modern day, even though to people from Quake, like, Counter-Strike was the noob game. That was the one for casuals. And then, you know, like, whatever, I don't know, like, League of Legends was beyond the pale, you know. Like, the joke is now, people think Counter-Strike's the hardcore game. That's the one that's, like, we're the real esports. So, if you were coming from Quake, the real question I would have, because I've had to think about this myself many times, is, when you love a hardcore game like Quake, most other games are quite different. Some of them don't maybe scratch the same itch. So the question would be, how have you been able to switch so many different games but still care about the game? Because I can tell, for example, when you talk about Overwatch, you actually care about Overwatch. You enjoy it. You're not just doing it because it's a gig and you're really good at acting. Like, you obviously like the game, but it's very different from games like Quake and the old schools. So what do you think it is in the different games? What are you able to tap into?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I'm still of the opinion that Quake is the height of skill. So anyone who disagrees, actually come and fight me over that. That's a hill down. That's my hill. I just don't think anyone has ever felt more competitive than a proper duel like in Quake. Like, that is just 1v1 Quake. That's just the height of skill and everything you want out of a competitive esports, in my book. Totally okay that people might not see that way, but they can just be wrong, and that's okay. But I think what really triggered me about Overwatch, which made me love it so much, or like even StarCraft, it's just, it needed to be very different from Quake. Because any shooter which is too close to my big love Quake would just be a direct comparison. So I need games who are so different from it, so I don't feel the urge to compare them. Therefore, I can love them. Same as a World of Warcraft player, I never got into Guild Wars or Final Fantasy because I just keep on, every time I'm trying another MMORPG, I just compare it to World of Warcraft, and it just, in my head, it just doesn't stack up because it's different. And that doesn't mean that it's worse, per se. It's just I'm so used to the one thing. That's why I struggle with a lot of other shooters, because I will compare it to Quake, and then it's going to fall short. So I think what really worked for Overwatch was that it had the aspects of like all the abilities or whatnot, which made it just a very different game, but it was still very high paced and dynamic, which is something I love. And then to add on top of that, I do just really like the storytelling Blizzard has in all of their games. Like, they have an actual universe with lore and stuff. And as someone who's really into fantasy and reading tons of like fantasy books, that was just kind of a nice add to it. It's like almost like if you give, I don't know, like Tank Junior in Quake a backstory. Not sure I would have cared the same way, but it just added another layer. Obviously, it's just like visually it was very pleasing. So that's what got me in with Overwatch. And then again, StarCraft, which I did for many years, it was just a completely different type of game. Same as Dota 2, which I did for a lot of years. Completely different game. No need to like compare it. I did quite a bit of Counter-Strike gigs too, but I can't say I ever cared about the game. And I would still do a gig if it's paid, but I'm not going to pretend that it's my lifeblood in there. Like, I think it's a good game. It's not for me though.
One thing I saw actually in CSGO, funnily enough, that you did quite early on, but now it's become sort of like a legit thing now, is now if something like League of Legends Worlds happens, they'll arrange in cinemas to have like, you can just go to the cinema and watch it instead of just watching it on Twitch or go to the venue. Like I saw you did one of those like way back in the day in CSGO where it was like in the UK, right? So essentially like, was that one, I assume because it was an early one, like, was it successful? Did it actually seem like it could be, like I can say it's actually kind of like a real thing now as far as I know. Same for sports as well, right? They do it on, like, they just do cinema viewings like World Cup or whatever.
It was fun. I mean, the experience I had, because I was out in a crowd doing like reporter stuff basically and doing interviews and behind the scenes stuff, and I had the feeling that everyone had a great old time. So I think you could do that for a lot of game if the location is good. I understand you can't do that in every city, just because there is not the same amount of fans and you don't really want to have that great cinematic experience with like 5 people in the audience. That just doesn't hit the same way. If for the people in the audience too, because the whole point of going there is to have a watch party where there is a lot of people. So if you don't have the viewership in person, then don't do it, I guess. But if you can guarantee that that cinema is filled with fans, then that's a great experience for everyone. And I highly recommend people doing that for future events.
Even though it might sound mad, when you were saying earlier about the era when you had to literally like put the fucking scaffolding up and set up the stage. So what's funny is at the time, you can imagine, like I was just complaining like a motherfucker when they were making us do that. And I was trying to like get Skype off and not do it when I finished the cast or whatever. But actually the sad thing is when you describe it like that, I actually almost do nostalgically look back on it. Because what I think about the industry then was because everyone was just so happy to be there. And the fact that there was an industry and there were these games and wow, we're a stage and I can be part of this and get paid. Like back then, the funny thing is, when I think back now, it just sounds awesome. But at the time, there were a lot of janky elements, right? Like, as you say, the way you were treated was way worse than now. So do you actually think, one thing I would ask is this, one thing that's changed a lot in the industry was events back in the day like that. A lot of them, for example, like the C-Bits and the Gamescoms, they were like multi-game events. You'd have like StarCraft and Quake and Dota and League of Legends. You'd have all these games at one thing. And one thing I thought they did do a very good job of is you could feel like a community vibe because you could watch the StarCraft Pro, watch the Quake final, or at the after party meet some CS player that he knew. Whereas like now every game's its own thing, isn't it? And every cast its own thing, and you are sort of a bit separated. Like, what do you think the contrast is between the old school and the current industry?
Because it was quote unquote smaller scale, it was just a great time to like connect with people who have a similar hobby. So it was a bit like, like you're in Hogwarts, so like you're not hating the other houses, right, like you're all wizards in the end and witches. But so like, there was kind of that one thing which united you. And I think that overall as a gamer, I don't think it was hardcore into just one game, because a lot of us, there wasn't enough to sustain you on one game. There wasn't enough content. So like there was only like one real big Quake event a year, which is QuakeCon, and then the rest of the time, like you had to look out for other stuff to do and to watch, right? So I think because of there not being enough products to consume, the need to just consume anything within the realm of gaming was just there, and that made that crossover happen, which now fortunately is not, or fortunately I guess for the industry, is not the case anymore. But it is kind of sad. I do look back nostalgically, because I liked that sense of community, whereas right now there's like some elitism going on. It's like, oh, you're from that game, like I don't give a shit about you. So it's like, it's kind of, and it's tough too, because you can't care about all the games. It's too much to care about. Even for people like me who used to, I mean, right now I'm like full-time on Overwatch, but before that I would do so many different games within a year, and it was still manageable because there wasn't that much going on. So my research was like only so much you needed to do. But right now, if you have to be like a Frankie or someone like who has to jump from game to game, that is a lot of research you need to do to catch up and really do it justice. Because you need to do it justice. You need to do it justice to the fans. Like you need to know as much as the fans know, at the very least, if you're working on a game. And right now, there's just so much content, so many events, so many tournaments, so many everything, that I think keeping on top of it has become so much harder. And that's part of the reason why you can't care about more than just one game. That's why I think shows which cover multiple games don't do well anymore. Like, it's a lovely idea in a nostalgic way, but it's not working like a G4 TV and stuff like that. I just don't think it's working because there is no such crossover. There's only a few of us who really genuinely care about multiple games, and for the rest of them, you're tuning in for 5 minutes when they talk about your game, and then what? Like, you're probably not going to stick around for the other stuff because your time is precious. You have other stuff to do than listening to that.
Along those lines, by the way, because you're right, actually, obviously back in the day, especially, you used to just go from one game to another game to a tournament to this tournament. And like the entire year, I'm sure you did like 5-6 different games, depending on what year we're talking about. So one thing I would ask is this, right? Since, as you say, in that scenario, just because of logistics and time, like, you know, you can't be a super expert about every game. You have one or two maybe you're super into. And as you say, you do your homework for the rest, right? One thing I want to talk about, because I thought it'd be cool since we're both like veterans in the industry, and a lot of newer people I notice have these problems, but they think that everyone, like, they see us, right, and they see the finished product, so they think like, oh, they're not having that problem. So I would ask you this. I assume you must at times have had like that imposter syndrome of like, fuck, do I actually know enough about this game? Should I even be taking this gig? Like, is this the game for me? Did you ever have that vibe?
I still have that. I still have that very severely, actually. I think one part of it is a good thing because it does keep you on your toe and it does keep you wanting to improve. I think it's good that I don't feel adequate for everything I'm doing because that does make me like dig in, do research, practice hard, work hard. But the flip side of that coin, of course, that is also a bad thing because I just don't rock up with the confidence I should sometimes, and that can just make for a bad performance, which is very unfortunate. And that's where you have to be very careful with like what kind of feedback you're taking into account. I think one of the mantras I kind of started just repeating over and over in my head is they wouldn't hire you if they didn't think you're good at your job.
Yes.
So if the right people hire you, then you know, like, no, like there was a reason I got hired, and it's because I'm good at this. So let's just do that. And that does sometimes help me, like, getting out of that little dark loop I have in my head where I'm like, I'm not good enough. I don't know anything. They should have hired this person or that person, or everyone hates me. Like, this is horrible. I don't know what I'm talking about. Like, I do know what I'm talking about. And if I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm very blunt about it and very obvious about it too. Like, I'm not going to pretend to know if I don't know. And I'm not ashamed to admit that either, even if it's live on air. Like, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, sucks. You can't know everything. That's it. So we all learn something together. I think a lot of people who break into the industry right now, they don't have the confidence of like so many years of being hired for gigs. I think that helps me, right? It's like 17 years in the industry. I must have done something correct. Like there must be a reason why I'm still around. And that can't just be because I have a vagina and women get hired, according to the internet, right? So I must have done something right. I can see how if you only just start out, that you don't have that confidence of like, oh well, I did all those incredible gigs in the past, so clearly I must be doing good. So I feel for people who are newer, and they also have a more of a tendency, which I notice a lot when I work with newer talent in the industry. They get a lot of feedback from their Reddits or their echo chambers on Twitter, and that is so harmful, like in a positive and in a negative way. Like, yeah, sure, if you only listen to like the comments of your videos and the fans, then you just get gassed up, and then you might stop improving. Then you might like never actually take any feedback the way you could be taking it, which is to improve yourself. You're just like, oh no, they're wrong, they're just haters. Like, it's not always that. Like, sometimes there is some good bits there too, but you just need to know where to get your feedback. And I think that's a tricky part in our situation. Like, who do you ask? Like, who's not just gassing you up? Who's honest with you? And sometimes that can be very harsh, but like you need that. And that's why you need a little bit of an imposter syndrome, because you need to keep on improving.
Yes. I would actually say, by the way, I've got a little angle on this, which is when people, because I can take it back to that initial thing you said, that like classic, like passive aggressive nerd thing of like, oh, if you actually know that, I'm going to like test if you actually do know this topic and whether you're like a real gamer or whether you're trying to trick us all. I actually think that's just a byproduct of the fact that so many of the fans, basically what I was like 25 years ago, they're just a young nerd who's like a bit antisocial. So what happens in that scenario is their only way of seeing the world is like a very sort of like rational materialist thing of like, right, if you're an expert, then you must know like more than everyone else. You have to know everything about the game. But I actually think that's so flawed now when I look at it as an older person. Because, for example, right, if anyone's seen my style, I actively like eschew trying to be like the tactician and do all, because my thing's like, look, the other guys on the desk are going to do that. I'm here to do like my unique style. So what I would say to you is, I actually think that's an area where people, even veterans, tunnel too much in the industry. They start trying to like compare themselves and think like, but do I know the most and stuff? Whereas here's what I would say, whether it's you or Frankie or Rachel Quirico or something, here's what I would say as to why these people are hired. To be you. That's what people like. It's like, even if in this case, right, you're not maybe the expert role, the analyst, like they want your vibe. They want what you bring personally to the broadcast. And in your case, people are also familiar with it, right? There's a comfort there. They've seen you for years and years.
Yeah, no, I think this is something not too many people talk about. Like you have a role. Like basically every broadcast is like a sitcom lineup, right?
Yes.
So you have like the comedian, you have like the bad guy. Like you have all those characters and you need them on broadcast. If you just take the same type, like you can't cast the same type and like fill a broadcast with that, it's going to be so boring. Like if you're looking at an analyst desk, you need those different kind of views, different perspectives. Not all of them need to be like a hardcore analytical know-it-all. That'd be so boring. Like I'd hate to host a desk like that. Like that's not what it should be. And I think a lot of people watching actually don't really realize that they do watch for the characters. They might think they're watching because they need the knowledge, but they really just, they're watching for the characters.
No, absolutely. I think what happens is this way. I think they just say publicly they watch for like the hardcore. Because that sounds respectable. Like, no, I'm not weird with it. I'm just like, but as you say, like really, it's like you say that you nailed it. It's like a sitcom. You want to tune in and see all your favorite friends and fucking Kramer out of Seinfeld comes through the wall, whoever that character would be in this case. You know what I mean? Because one thing along those lines I would actually ask about is, how would you define what you think then your flavour is? What is the soy flavour? Because for example, I've noticed you always do try to like it's obvious you know your desk analysts really well, because you're always trying to like sort of needle them a little bit and sort of tease them a little bit, and you're always trying to throw something a bit cheeky in there, right?
Somewhere between, I guess my alignment would be like somewhere between chaotic neutral towards evil.
Okay.
Well, because I do it with the smile, so no one actually noticed that I'm stabbing. I think what I do is I just try to get the characters be the characters. So I know the trigger points of the people I'm working with, and I just like push those buttons in order to get it out, which I think is just basically what a host should be doing anyway, right? Like as a host, you just want to enable everyone else to be the best of themselves. And if you understand the characters you're working with, that can be so much fun. So yeah, you gotta come in with the right quips, and you don't need to know everything. You have to be kind of the buffer as well sometimes between the community and the people you have on the desk, as well as the buffer between the production and the people you have on the desk. You're just kind of janitor of everything. You just like clean it all up and sort it all out, and that's kind of the hosting style I like to do as my role, or how I see it.
One thing as well along these lines that it's making me think of is, even though occasionally you will get the very rare type of woman who really does just want to be the expert, be the analyst, so like Frosco or Emily Rand in League of Legends, if people know those people, they really have dedicated themselves like any man would to just be like, know everything about League of Legends and have this whole entire full spectrum approach. Even so, I actually do think one area that people might be shocked I'll bring this up, but one area I do think there is actually a latent sexism in esports is, if you ever do the roles like you do, host, desk host, interviewer, stage host, if you do these roles, there are a type of person, sometimes in the industry, who do think like your job basically is like hold a mic, just ask the question, then shut the fuck up and let them talk. Whereas I do get the vibe, look, we don't have to throw anyone under the bus, but in my own productions, when I was working with Flashpoint with Potter, I know Richard on some of the things he did at E-League, I've tried to encourage actually to win on these shows, like just mix it up, just jump in with us. Like, if you have a take, by the way, every now and then, even if you're the host, don't worry, you can give a spicy take every now and then. Maybe we'll have fun with it. Like, I feel like that side, there is like an element there that's still a holdover, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm very grateful that for the people watching Watchpoint, like I get my analytical points in here and there too when I feel really strongly about it. And because we have someone like Hex in production right now who used to be a caster and who's good friends with me, and because I work so closely on the production side as a full-time employee, so I'm like co-producing in a way, just without the producer credit, because I'm writing the show with them. If I feel strongly about a point, I'm making sure I'm getting my point in there as well, and I don't care if people like that or not. Like I just do it, and I think it's a good way to start a conversation as a host as well. I don't think you have to limit to yourself, but just going like, oh, so what do you think? Interesting. What do you think? Like, I think that's bullshit. I think you can have a proper conversation with the analysts on the desk. So I think you can do the beginning of the topic, and then if they want to do a deep dive on it, like, awesome, cool. So yeah, I'm not shying away from it. I just want to make sure that I only do it when it's necessary, as in, I don't want to shoehorn it in, because in the end, I still do think like it is not necessarily my role, and I don't want to model the roles too much, because sometimes I feel like that, especially if you have a show like we have on Watchpoint, where it's 30 minutes. We have to be on time, like, because we have a hard out. I think there is only so much like improv you can do with like starting a discussion on something. So I usually let them know in advance when like, hey, I'm not going to have a talking point about this and that, and I have some B-roll and I want to bring that up, and that's that. And I do chime in on like their points every once in a while. But just because I like doing that, I totally understand that there's a lot of hosts who don't want to do that at all or don't feel comfortable with it. Because obviously if you do it, then you also open yourself up to be a target of more criticism, right? Since everyone out there is an expert, so obviously they all know more than you. Like, there's still people explaining Overwatch to you, and I'm like, oh, darling, that's so sweet.
I mean, I know everyone in the industry loves that meme where it's like, and now over to the comments to see what the experts think. That like famous meme. That is what it's like to work in the industry, guys. Like, it doesn't matter what you say. The joke is, it's only everyone at home that knows everything. We're all just the idiots giving the wrong opinions on camera for a living. In a sense, unfortunately. By the way, along those lines, another thing I've noticed that's the difference between a lot of people who came in the last few years, when the broadcasts are really structured and they have all the segments planned out and you have production meetings. Like, these were alien concepts when we began. As you say, we used to help put the stage up, then go onto a mic. By the way, we were all casters. There was no desk. There was no discourse. We were all just casters, and sometimes just one caster even, not even a duo. And you just talk as long until the game ends, and then you go. Like, back then, there wasn't any structure. Everything was improv. Everything. In fact, famously, one of the ways I even got started in CSGO on camera was because there used to be loads of tech delays. So since I'm someone who can just waffle forever and I like to just shit talk, that was great, because I'd just be like, right, go half an hour, just talk about anything now. But nowadays, I actually noticed the modern day person who comes in the industry, because they're thinking of it very professionally, a lot of them actually do want a lot of structure. Like, I've met some of the modern desk hosts where one of my few criticisms is some of them don't really like, they feel really uncomfortable improving, or they want like every point that everyone's going to say to be like mapped out. What's your take on that? Like, how much do you embrace that approach? Because, as you say, if you've got like a hard out, for example, you have to hit your points and get out. You can't spare 5 minutes extra. But how much do you also like some of the old school sort of improv, fly by the seat of your pants approach? Where would you say you are on that?
I love improv. I think it makes for a more authentic feel of the show, because it gives the audience more that sense of like, it's just some dudes and not dudes and dudettes, I guess, hanging out and having a great old time. It gives that feeling of like you just hanging out with your friends as a viewer. Whereas if it's all structured in like sports kind of studio style, then yeah, you don't have that same sense of familiarity. So you might not get as into the characters and whatnot, or as attached to the show itself and to the people doing it, which I think is a bit of a loss, because we are in this unique position in esports where we have that closeness to the community because we are part of the community and the people see us as part of the community. And I think we should embrace that. And I think we should like tap into that a little more again. And I do feel like some shows are starting to kind of go back to those, back to the roots a little bit and have a little bit more of a free flow, whereas others are trying really hard to keep it even more professional. And I understand the more structured approach if you have a lot of sponsored segments, if you have a lot of hard in and outs, like it's just kind of necessary. I still feel like even in those stricter kind of guidelines, you still have wiggle room, or should make room for like some free-flowing segments where, like this is just kind of like at the end for the last 10 minutes, we're just going to like ramble a bit, like, so I think you should still keep that element somewhat alive and just like have some cornerstones of structure to work around. And as long as everyone is aware of the ins and outs, you have to hit, like if there has to be a commercial at this part of the show, like 15 minutes in, then there's no way around it. And obviously if you're just like rambling, then it's a bit hard to like just cut it off and then go to a commercial. But that's then on the host, right? The host needs to like rein it in. So it's a good host just knows when to start reining it in and when to steer the conversation to something which he or she can then transition into a break. So that's just one of the elements which makes the hosting job so important in the current like sphere of esports and gaming.
Right. Obviously, as you said, like Counter-Strike wasn't really your game. You come from Quake, so you were wanting games to be different enough, right? I saw there was a few years, though, where you were doing all the big Dota events. Like, you were all around the place, like in America, Europe, Asia, whatever, right? In this particular time period, did you vibe with Dota? Was that a game that appealed to you?
Yeah, no, I love Dota because I played, like, back when it was just a mod, right? So I really generally love Dota. I did, however, end up struggling with here comes the drama. Just some of the people I worked with, I struggled with,
okay.
And some of the people I worked for, event-wise, I just started to feel, and then like that combined with the community being not the nicest towards women. Eventually, I just sat down. I was like, "Is that what I want to do to myself?" Like, I don't need it. I can literally just move on and continue doing what I love. And then it was just like great timing because Overwatch was announced and I had something to jump on, which I was really excited about. So I just bid my farewells and left. Not because I don't like the game. I still love the game.
Sure.
I still follow the game. I just couldn't get on board with some of the community and parts of the people in the professional sphere of it, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough. By the way, in that case, one thing I would ask is this: without crowbar and the drama angle, I would just say this: like, can you sort of give like a flavour of what was off-putting about it, or what made you feel unwelcome, or like it's just the wrong game for you or something?
I mean, it started with so I always loved doing the ESL events for Dota. Like, those were fun. I worked a lot with ESL, so I felt appreciated as a talent and within my role and as a professional. It was events like TI which were a little off-putting to me by the way I was treated there by some of the staff, where it's just like, this is very not what I agree with and what I think is within the realm of being professional. Started with the communication leading into it or leading up to it, and then just a few conversations I had right after with a few people who worked at Valve, where it's just like, and I mean, it's unfortunate because I'm sure there's a lot of fantastic people working for that company, and again, it's a fantastic game which I really, really love. I love the competitiveness of it, but I was just so off-put by those few interactions that I was just thinking to myself, like, I don't want to work with those people ever again. So, and I felt like they felt the same way about me.
Right.
So I know, like after the one TI where I got hired from Valve, I wasn't hired again next year. And then I looked back and was like, okay, I see how it is.
Right.
And I did ask for some feedback in regards to that. And it turned out it was those few people I had those interactions with who basically just shat on me as a professional. And I was like, okay, well, and there's that. And since TI is the one big event you aspire to do, what's the point in doing all the little events if you then miss out on the big one because you have some beef, I guess, with some people? And I don't really have beef with anyone in the industry, so that was a foreign, weird concept to me, and I just didn't want to expose myself to that.
I mean, it's cool that you actually had the agency, though, where you could actually move around and go to other games then and not feel... I mean, I can imagine if someone only came from Dota, you might feel trapped in that sense, right?
Yeah. Oh, and I feel very fortunate in that regard. Like, also because I was working full-time for Freaks for You Gaming back in the days, and they allowed me to just, like, move on to something else. It just coincided with some other stuff we did, where we started being on German television 7 days a week. So, like... You know, it was kind of lucky timing, I guess, when I decided to step away from Dota, that I had something to fall back onto. If I didn't, I don't know if I could have just stepped away without feeling like I'm ruining my career here.
Sure. As you say, obviously Overwatch has been like, I mean, you've had years and years that you've been in the game now, but if people don't know, even in Overwatch, no one can make any accusations you just came when it was big or whatever, because you were actually doing the open circuit when it was like the first year of the game, right? You were doing the MLGs and the DreamHacks and whatnot.
I know. was super involved early on, and then for some World Cup stuff, I actually didn't get invited because there's one person at Blizzard who doesn't like me very much, or was one person at Blizzard who didn't like me very much, and was vetting against me as hard as that person could, which is like, okay, cool. They just made it their goal to not have.
Was it just a personal dislike? They had no real reason.
Just wanting a person. I still don't know what I ever did to that person to get on their shit list, but that person then left Blizzard, and suddenly I was hired again for stuff. So funny how that works. Yeah, no, but I've been there from the get-go. But I've been there from the get-go for almost every Blizzard game, I feel. Like, I mean, I started with World of Warcraft and did World of Warcraft Arena for BlizzCons, which a lot of people don't know. I casted it as well for the Battle.net Invitational, and I did a ton of StarCraft and StarCraft 2. I did all the world,
WCS, yes.
That was it. So many acronyms. I did like all those stops and lots of hosting and casting in that sphere. I did Heroes of the Storm. I did the first few events. I actually was the host for the first ever Hearthstone tournament at BlizzCon, which some people don't know. So I was involved in literally every single title they ever had. And yeah, I guess I just continue that.
If people don't know as well, saying you did WoW Arena actually is super legit if you want on a resume of like, I'm a true nerd. Because if people don't know, I remember like when I used to work for SK Gaming, we had a load of players in World of Warcraft Arena 3v3. And the amount of times I've tried to get these guys, like, look, I followed a lot of games, guys, like, explain it to me. And they'll be like, it'd be a waste of time, bro. Like, they said literally, you'd have to start playing now and maybe in a few years you'd get what we were doing. And I was like, what? But then when I actually watched the game, they're right. It's so complicated. That is one of the most complicated esports games ever, right?
No, it's insane, because if you're not familiar with it, you have to be familiar with the entire scope of an entire MMORPG.
Exactly, yes.
Not just spells, you need to know about equipments, and like, you need to know about every aspect of it and how it interacts with literally everything. It's too much. Like, even when I casted it, I was a little overwhelmed. That's why I didn't stick around for the casting part of it and transitioned as more being a host, because I still understand what's happening, but I felt like my English isn't good enough to be quick enough to really explain what is happening, since it's not my native tongue. And that just made it super hard back in the days, because that was like, 10 years or more ago when I did that. So then I just concentrated more of the PvE aspects. I did a lot of the Blizzard live raids for like Gamescoms and what have you not.
Actually, along those lines, I should ask you about that, because I know that's another thing that a lot of people, because we're all obviously speaking in English, which for someone like me in America, we can take for granted it's our native tongue. Like, I mean, the joke is I don't speak any other languages anyway, so I have no idea if I'd be rubbish at them. But I know a lot of people, when they're speaking second language English, they do actually get a bit self-conscious, or they wonder, like, do people find my accent strange? One thing I've noticed in your case is I actually think Swiss, by the way, is going to be one of the best backgrounds to come from for this, because I know with Maniac, even though he veers a bit more on the French side, because like he's been in the French scene for a long time in Counter-Strike, I always tell him, mate, your English sounds like you're like out of Star Trek or something. It's like some perfect, like, neutral accent. Like, I actually couldn't, if I didn't know you were from Switzerland, I would never know where you're from. It's just some strange, neutral English accent. Like, do you ever get self-conscious about it still?
Sometimes I do, mainly when I'm tired, because I can tell that my translator just kind of stops working, or when I'm very drunk. Like, that's when I don't feel as comfortable anymore, because I'm not entirely sure what's coming out of my mouth. Other than that, I just think that it's all about practice. And now that I live in the US, like, I speak more English than I speak my own tongue, right? So that's certainly helpful now. I think back when I still lived in Europe and my day-to-day language, the spoken language, was not English, I struggled a lot more to do events in English, because I just didn't feel adequate, especially when I'm surrounded by native speaking talent who they're so quick, right? You can be so witty. I'm like, in my head, I'm witty, like I have the right response. But the delay it takes to translate it just makes it really awkward when you come in like just those 10 seconds too late with like, haha, and here's my little thing to it. So it makes for a few awkward moments. I still sometimes have those awkward moments, but you got to lean into it.
One thing that I want to ask about with Overwatch, because here's the area where people will never understand how in my different like vehicles, I do actually give a different side of myself. So, for example, on Twitter, obviously I'm raw as fuck, but spoiler, I'm not going to say anything rude about Overwatch or Blizzard because you work for them. Like, I want to ask you your thoughts now. I don't want to make it trouble for you. So what I would ask is this. It's going to be a very shrewdly phrased question though, which is obviously when Overwatch launched, and specifically the Overwatch League, and it was obviously billed as this giant thing that's going to be as big as sports, and like the projections were huge. There are a lot of people in the industry, even super like legit people, who were very critical of the Overwatch League and even the premise of Overwatch League and even this idea, can it be a big sports league? So what I would ask is this. Has it been awkward? Because I know, for example, I had this experience where like Monty, my friend, was like working on like the face of the broadcast, but at the same time I'm criticising the broadcast, the game, like whether it even should be a game all the time myself. That is a bit awkward because on the one hand, like I pull for him, and by the way, I actually like Overwatch the game. I wanted it to succeed. So has it been a bit weird in that regard that like a lot of people who I'm sure you're friends with, in some ways, it might seem like they're almost against like your job existing in a fucked up way?
Yeah, actually, it's weird. There's a lot of feelings about that. And it's actually something like I talk frequently about with people like Mitch and whatnot, because we have such a wide and broad background in the industry where we've done so many different games, so we're familiar with so many different talents. So to see them shitting actively on the product we're working on and we're pouring our heart and soul into, kind of sucks. Like, and
I'm sure it feels sometimes like, you know, if they're ever bringing up like viewership or something, it almost seems like they're enjoying the fact that they think it's doing badly or something, like cheering it on.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the fine line. Like, I just make mental notes of who is criticizing it in a way of like, you know, like you said, like you want it to do good. Like, you're not hating it. Like you technically wish it well, but it's just not hitting the expectations, and that is completely fair. Like, it's not hit the expectations I had for it either, right? Like, there's so much I think we still to improve on, and which we are working on, but there's only so much you can do, you know, as an individual working on a broadcast. So a lot of it is out of our hand as well, and there's only so much we can do, and we are actively doing. So to see people like criticize it in like a constructive kind of manner, super fair, absolutely okay, totally down for that. But I think it's the gloating, like, haha, you failed, that kind of shit. That gets me, because funny enough, there's a lot of people which I feel were very interested in even being part of it early on, and then they weren't ending up being part of it. So now they
got sour grapes.
Yeah, so I feel like there's some of that with a few people, and it's just it's a bit unfortunate, because overall, I think if you're really just looking at what the Overwatch League could have been or is, this is something that if you like esports and you like gaming, you should want it to succeed. Like, I want League of Legends to succeed in their endeavors. I want to see Valorant succeed, because I think success in each and every single game, whether that be a competitor to my game directly or not, I think a rising tide lifts all the ships, right? Like, yes. It's good for us because it brings in more sponsors, it brings in more money, it brings in more people. In the end, everyone will benefit from it. So I see no reason to actively try to put something down. I think it's okay to criticize, and I think it's okay to like talk about it. But I don't think it's okay to like gloat about it and wish it going down. Like, I think that's why I take an issue with it. And yeah, it's definitely been a little awkward, because then you get together with those people and they're so nice to you, and I'm like, but also you want my livelihood to disappear, sure. And you're like, you're shitting on like something I work my ass off for. So that's not super nice.
Yeah, one thing you say there, actually, I can see why you make the connection with Mitch Uber, if people don't know, because since he also comes from a background of like Counter-Strike and a bunch of the ESL games, right, the perception from some of the industry people is sort of like you're supposed to join in and be like, look, you guys don't really think Overwatch is for real, right? It's just some like fake game or something. There's almost that vibe, right?
Oh, we turned into the punching bag of the gaming world at the moment. We're just kind of waiting around until another game becomes the punching bag,
sure.
Because eventually that's going to happen. Like,
yes.
Eventually another publisher is going to F it up, and then we'll be the talk of town. Obviously didn't help what happened within Blizzard. Like that was or rather Activision. Yes. Like that just really, really shot us in the foot there, and that's on no fault to the Overwatch League. I think we got hit by like a lot of really unfortunate things, which is all the lawsuits, which are obviously like super like that needs to be talked about, and you need to be critical about it, and you need to be vocal about it. Like that is serious business. And like none of us is saying like, like that should just disappear. Like it's not a big deal. Like, no, it is a big deal, and that's totally fair. But that's not the fault of like Team 4. That's not those developers. It's not the fault of like people working on a daily at the Overwatch League. That is the fault of like something entirely different. I think you have to like kind of set those apart. So for people being like, let's boycott the Blizzard games, It's like, but then you're actively hurting the people you're protecting. Like, you're outraged because you want to protect them and you think they're being treated unfairly, but then you also kind of fuck them over in a way. So it's a difficult place to be in, because it kind of just makes, like, you know, the colleagues of the world untouchable, because you can't really do anything about it as an individual. And the boycott, while well-intentioned, and like the shitting on the game, while maybe well-intentioned, it's not actually achieving what you wanted to achieve, which puts us in a kind of a weird spot. And I don't know what the beginning of this rant was.
It's all good. It's all good. How you made it. It was a well-said point. Okay,
there was a point there somewhere.
Right, one thing that I actually think for you specifically has been quite good about the way Overwatch League has developed over the years is because there was, like, in the first couple of seasons, sort of like a rotating cast of, like, different people came in from different games. Some stayed, some moved on a couple of years later or immediately. It feels to me like at the beginning you were just one of a cast of people. The Overwatch League's kind of become yours now, right? Like, you are like one of the main faces everyone expects to see. Do you have sort of a sense of does it belong to you in a way? I don't mean like a fucked up sense. I mean, like, do you feel as though like it's part of you? It reflects you in some way?
I think it does, actually, because I've transitioned role almost every year early on, right? I went from sideline reporter to desk analyst to desk host, and now I'm still the host and like doing some other stuff on the side. So it's a bit my baby in a way, I guess. So I do feel strangely attached, more attached than I've ever felt to any other product I worked on before, just because I'm doing it full time. I'm not splitting my time with other games, because I've been there through every rendition of it. And quite frankly, I think it's sad that we went through so many turnovers in terms of like lineup, because we had so many great people.
Oh, some amazing people, yeah.
But then also, like, the new people who came in, they were also just so incredible. So I think while there's a lot of people I really truly miss and I'd love to work with again, I also really appreciate the new faces that joined us each and every year, because I think they also added so much to it, and they brought in like a fresh wind, a fresh perspective, and a bit of something else, which I think is also kind of important. I do think that if a thing goes on for that long, never adding new faces will make it a little stale in a way. There, now I'm going to fear for my job. So, like, I guess we need a new host.
True. You did sort of say it like that. True. We need a bit of variety. Exactly. Yeah.
No, never mind. No, I think some people should stay forever.
Exactly. Right. One thing I do want to ask about quite specifically, and I'll give a little bit of a preamble to this, is one thing I really enjoy about watching your work on the Overwatch League is your relationship with Reinforce. Because if people don't know, I know Reinforce from way back when he was just some little Swedish Counter-Strike journalist for like Fragbite or something, going to the events. And what's funny is, even though now, if people only know him in esports, like on camera, like he looks super slick, he's like got really into shape, like he seems like a professional. Obviously he's built up his rep in this game. The funny thing is he still always has that like little brother vibe. Like, if people don't know, I've told this story before, when I first met this guy, he like accidentally spilled a whole fucking pint of like lager all over me, and obviously you can imagine me, I'm just like, I don't even know you yet, motherfucker, you've just done that. Like, and he was the whole time he's like apologizing, oh I'm so sorry, like, and asking like Richard Lewis, like, do you think Thorin hates me because I did that thing? And I was like, just stop going on about it. Like, but that one thing I've noticed is because he does have that thing where he's like, he's got like a naivety about him, hasn't he, Reinforcer? Like, but at the same time, he's so earnest. Like, it's not fake either. So what I love is you always roast the fuck out of him. Like, you two seem to have a really good rapport.
But a lot of people think that I'm really mean to him.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, like actually, a few times it happened that a producer got messaged by like people in the community asking why Zoe is always like so mean to Reinforce, and like they would literally like set it up as if I'm like mobbing him or some sort. I'm just like, no, we're cool. Like,
sure,
that's our thing. Like, I also have like that sense of big sister to him, because like I know him from sleeping on the couch in the Too Good studio, basically.
There you go.
So as a little intern. So yeah, it's funny because he's like one of those people who kept on crossing my way, and even before we worked with each other. And he was just kind of there, right? He just like also existed in the space, but never really like worked with him. So it's kind of like watching someone grow up, and now he's like wearing his little suits.
It's wild, isn't it? Plus, the other thing that's so crazy to me is now he is this big, like, the expert of Overwatch. Like, you expect to see him on the broadcast. But if people don't know, here's another thing. He wasn't just joking, guys. In the early seasons of Overwatch League, he secretly did think he could still be a pro and that he might get invited back to, like, a big team. He did, didn't he? Like, I know now he's embraced it. Like, this is just his gig. But he, like, sort of secretly held that. He had a candle going the whole time that he'd become a pro again, didn't he?
I'm sure. Yeah, no, he's such a hard worker, though. And, like, he's so earnest, as you say. Like, he has that naivety about it, which I really appreciated. And then he has that Swedishness, which, like, really plays into that as well. And that's a weird thing to say, the Swedishness. It's just, like, some jokes, even though he's a giant, they go way over his head. And it just makes it more funny to shoot those jokes at him, because he just doesn't land the same way. And I think there's a lot of really funny interactions we have because of that on the desk, which... just rest assured, everyone watching, like, we're good friends. I love and appreciate his work, and I'd never be actually mean to him. Sometimes he might think I'm actually mean to him, so we have to have a conversation every once in a while. I was like, hey, we're good, right? Like, this was just jokes and giggles. So he's like, yeah, we're good. So yeah.
Thing is, I can see why he gets away with it, though, why people were, like, taking his side, because they just see those big puppy dog eyes, like, oh, he's being mean to him. It's like, nah, this guy he gives it back. Don't worry about that, guys. Don't worry about that. One of the other things as well, along similar lines, I mean, I know now, like, some of their focus is more towards Valorant, but the other thing I thought was really cool and is one of the underrated stories of the Overwatch League is the emergence of the Plat Chat boys, and it seems like you get along with them very well. Like, they've really brought a lot of the personality to that broadcast for me.
It's so funny how that came out of nothing, basically, because that was literally just some homies sitting around, like, babbling, and it is still very much just that. I think that's what makes it so great, though. It's because it's really appealing, because you do get that sense like you're sitting in the living room with them and you're just having a laugh. So obviously I'm very salty because all those years they never once invited me to Plat Chat. So
there you go. Okay.
No, in all honestly though, I love watching their stuff. I think it's super entertaining, and I think it adds a lot to the Overwatch League as well, because it allows for some of them to, like, show more character. Like a Mr. X, for example, as a caster, you only have so much talk time, right, and so much camera time, so you can't really fully be your character. You can't really, like, embrace the you want to have, because there is only so much you can do as a caster. So for people like him to, like, have an opportunity to just chat and just be themselves and, like, show that to the public, I think is super valuable. I think every broadcast should have something like that, where you just have a get together behind the scenes of all the talent, which are just bantering. Like, I think it adds a lot to the viewing experience of the main broadcast afterwards.
One thing I want to ask you about, it's actually quite a game-specific thing about Overwatch, is when Overwatch League first began, I remember thinking, like, a real flaw that it had as a premise was because it was initially set as, like, we're geolocated in all these American cities, and they obviously wanted, like, a traditional sports base. I remember saying to people, though, yeah, but the downside of this game is, remember, this is a game where you've got amazing Koreans, and you've got a pipeline of talent coming, so the problem is, eventually, aren't all the Koreans just going to sort of, like, be in every team, which at one point they did. Like the first couple of seasons, it did get mega Korean full, but one thing I've noticed is quite cool is it's sort of stabilized now, though there are, like, a ton of still top Western talents, and you can have these mixed teams. Like, what do you think about this aspect? I feel like Overwatch the game is a really unique game in that respect. It's not like all Korean teams only or all North American teams only. It's a very, like, weird mixed element to it, right?
Yeah, it really. It might also go back to the fact that the FPS or shooter games in general are not as popular generally in Asian countries.
Sure.
Like, you don't see the emergence of that star potential in those kind of countries. If you're looking at any other, like, Call of Duty or Counter-Strike or, like, any other shooter that has, like, an esports scene, I don't really think there's too many Asian names there. And with Overwatch being a little bit of a mashup of a shooter, but also having the team aspects, which you have in other games, I think that invited more Asian players into it, but also it's still a shooter, and that still keeps a lot of them also out of it, which I guess is lucky in a way, because that really gives the opportunity for a lot of Western talent to also emerge. And right, as you said, like, now it's pretty stabilized. We have a lot of really, really successful mixed teams, which I'm the most excited about, because at the very early on, like, the early attempts of having mixed rosters just never really went well, because communication is so very important in this game. And That is obviously a struggle if the language barrier is in place, but they made it work now for quite a few teams, which is amazing to see.
One thing I want to ask, because I thought this is a very specific question I could ask of the host, is I know it's one of the challenges, because I know I've known some of the people who worked on Overwatch and I've tried to watch it myself many times, and I was able to actually enjoy it as a game. I know a lot of people have their own issues with it because there's so much stuff going on, but basically that's the question I have. Since it's famously a game where you're bombarded with information, action, there's always play. The joke of the game is like, they're not observing it badly, guys. It's just impossible to catch all the action. It's like an NFL game. Everyone's doing everything on the screen. Like, you can watch the ball, but there's still something going on down at the bottom of the screen that's affecting the play, So the question I have is this: do you have sort of like a rationale in mind of how much do we focus on like specific moments in the game? How much do we try and like give like tactical elements? How much do we just follow like a narrative of a player storyline or a team story? How do you kind of strike the balance? 'Cause it seems like a game where you have a lot of choice, but you also can't do everything, right?
Yeah. I think this really like comes down to the casters working with the observers on it to like have a cohesive kind of storyline, and both being aware of how to follow that as the game goes on, because you can't capture everything. This is not possible with that game. And the attempt of doing just that, which I think is kind of what we tried early on, because you need to talk about everything, you need to show everything to like tell the full picture. Like, no, that's just models everything. It's just way too complicated. You can't actually do that with a game. So I think as time goes on, you'll start to really realize, if you're really listening to some of the top casters we have, they latch onto a specific narrative, which really only involves like a few key players. They run with that narrative throughout the entirety of a map and switch accordingly if needs be. And then obviously some bigger team fights, there's like some hype moments in action being called, but it always is being reined back in to like follow that one narrative to really make it a bit better understandable. And I mean, it's just the nature of the game though, right? Like Counter-Strike is just so much slower. So even though you have a lot of people on the field, it's easier to follow, and it's very obvious like what the goal is of Counter-Strike, and like the UI is very obvious. So I think you don't have that many distractions. In Overwatch there's so many distractions that you actually need the commentary in order to make it work as a viewable game. If you watch it without a commentary, I think you get lost like very, very quickly, even as a player who's playing like a lot at home. Even for them, I think it's difficult. Even I sometimes struggle. Like, if the observing is all over the place, I struggle understanding what is going on. I literally just watch the health bars to like have an idea of what is going on, because I can't tell if there's too many switches and whatnot. So I think you really need to have a good observing team and good casting, which leads the way where you're looking. If you don't have that, you kind of get lost.
Right, maybe this could be either for like I say, it's probably like a bit implausible that a pure casual is going to watch Overwatch right now because we're talking about it. But let's say maybe we can take it like someone who watched the beginning of Overwatch or the first season of Overwatch League, and maybe they just didn't tune in. Maybe they were a fan of another game and it was just like a side interest. Right, I want a player for these three roles: DPS, tank, and support. Pick one current player in the Overwatch League. Sell me one player in each of those roles. I want to like give me your angle of like this guy. It could be for whatever angle. It could be how good they are at the game. It could be some cool narrative storyline. Sell it to me. What one DPS, tank, and support will you tell me that I should watch now if I wanted to watch some Overwatch? Okay,
so DPS, very easy. The Grand Finals MVP, also the Rookie of the Year. That's Proper from San Francisco Shock. That kid, that's a generational talent like none I've ever seen in my entire career. Like, that kid, like, came from Contenders, so tier 2 scene, and was a lot of talk about, like, hey, there's this dude and he's pretty good. But then he, like, they can be so good in Contenders, but then they're playing in the big leagues.
Yeah, the pressure, everything costs.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure and whatnot. No, not for that guy. Like, he came in with a bang. Like, he demolished the opposition. Like, he's so versatile. He has such a deep hero pool. His ability to pick up new heroes as well. He's just so good. Like, it's stupid how good he is at everything. Like, he has an aim like nothing I've ever seen before. His movement, his map awareness. Like, I'm a huge fan. He's so much fun to watch. So Proper, that's a DPS you wanna follow, and that's where you want to bet your money on if you're a betting person. Also, betting is bad, so don't do that. Now in tank role, I think one to keep an eye on is Hardy. He had such an emotional underdog story because he's a German player. This is already like a big thing because there's not an awful lot of German players or European players in general who made it into the Overwatch League and actually like really are playing on a high level. We had European players, but they were always like in kind of midfield. And London Spitfire as a team, which he played for now this last season, throughout the entirety of the league, like they first win this championship. They're this awesome roster, full Korean, very great, whatnot, have you not. And then they just dropped off and they were a shit show, an absolute laughing stock of the community. People made fun of them. They went for a full European roster, obviously, because they're the London Spitfire. People didn't agree with that. They got run over by other teams. And then this season, they're coming in again with the European roster. People were doubting them. Everyone was doubting them. And they just surprised us. Like, they just like, I don't know, over the course of the last season, they just like stepped it up and up and up and up. And then they ended up as one of the top teams we're having, which is such a cool story. And a lot of that was because of Hadi, who came in as a bit of a meme player because he looked like he's an absolute one trick. And he has like that funny German accent, you know, in his interviews and like the German humor and just like all of that just made him look like a meme. But then he just actually exceeded all expectations. Turned out to be like an absolute Chad player. So he's just emotionally, he's someone you would like to follow that storyline. Like he's a fun person to watch. He also got the Dennis Havelka Award, which is a very meaningful award for like positive change for his team and
Internet Hulk for people who don't know.
Exactly, from Internet Hulk, who unfortunately passed way too soon. So, and that group was so funny, not funny, it was so beautiful to see him getting that award as well, because Dennis was a German player in Overwatch as well. And as I said, there's not many Germans who play that game on the highest level. And Dennis was a player that he was looking up to. So it was really, really cool to see Hadi getting that award. It was so nice to see Hadi and his team finishing so high after we memed them. We were mean about it. Like, we were not nice about it. Like, they were a running joke on our desk. We would like predict them for the funs and lulz, not because we ever think they win. And then they started winning. We're like, hold on, what is happening? So yeah, Hadi, tank player to watch. Support player, I'm still on Shu. I just really like Shu, even though I don't think he performed this well this last season. However, as far as support players go, I think he's like the Jonak, or could be a Jonak, because he can be very explosive. He has great aim. He's one of those support players who, when they pop off, they pop off. Like, he has a lot of really great single person moments, and that's hard as a support player to have like those explosive performances. And I think Shu, over the course of his career, continue to have them, and I just want to see him on a really good team again next year and hope he continues to pop off.
Right. One thing that I've also noticed from a lot of the female colleagues I've had on events is there's something about being at the event where a lot of the women who follow these games get like super emotionally connected to like a specific player, especially if they know their storyline, like you're saying, like some tragic past, or, you know, they're like an eager up and coming player or something. And like famously, I'll give you an example, like Smix. I mean, you've seen it on camera. She cries almost every time someone wins. Like, that's just who she is. And the joke is, she really has unironically told me a million times, like, I just wish they could both win. And obviously, like, I'm like an old school nerd, so I'm like, the fuck? Like, no, like, the one who wins deserves to win. But that's just like a difference, obviously, right? So that question is this: is there anyone like that in Overwatch League, in the history of the Overwatch League, that's ever really got to you? Is there anyone where when they won, it made you cry, or actually genuinely like brought an emotional reaction? Is there someone, a team or a player that stands out in that sense?
I don't think individually. I think it's always like team, and it's not even the stories. I think I get emotional when players get emotional. Right. So it just rubbed off on me. So I think that's the moments they get. So even if I'm not initially emotionally invested, if I see people being genuinely angry, genuinely excited, genuinely sad, that gets me. That makes me root for you. If you show genuine emotion, whatever emotion that is, and be that like a player who's like especially mean and aggressive, like I find it entertaining. Like, it just gets me. Like, I think it is an emotional sport, if you will, and I think that's what we need. We need those emotions, because that means that something's at stake. I think people care, right? And that shows in a lot of different emotions. That's why I think we should show players crying when they lose. Yes. I don't think we should shy away from that. I know that caused some outrage and a lot of different events, and I think that's so strange, because it's not because I revel in seeing people cry. Like, it makes me cry too, but I think I think it shows that they care, and I think that's important. Like, I need to see them caring. I hate nothing more than a team winning and not telling their fucking faces. When they just sit there like it's another day in the office, like, oh, I just want $1 million. Oh, well, whatever. Like, no, fuck that. Like, I need emotions. That makes me root for you. Like, I'm not coming in emotional about a team, but if they give me something, then I feed off of that.
By the way, you alluded to it earlier. Obviously, you've done all this work in Dota and a lot of Blizzard titles and other games that basically might be viewed by Riot as like rival games or whatever the fuck. But like, you've never really been in League of Legends. Is there a reason why? Was there ever the opportunity?
It's not true, actually.
Oh,
the first few League of Legends events before the LCS started, I hosted those. That was fair before Shox was working for SK as an interviewer. And in fact, I was in talks of becoming the host for the LCS.
Oh, right. Were you doing like the Gamescom qualifier and stuff?
I was not. Now, was it Gamescom? I'm not sure if it was. It might have been, actually. It's been a long time ago. But I did those events, and I generally did have interest in it.
Right.
And was considering it.
What went wrong then? Why didn't it happen?
Well, I don't know, actually. They just suddenly were like, oh, no, we hired someone else.
Oh, there's another person. There's some guy in Riot now who hates you, apparently. Like, what the hell?
No, I don't think so. I think Shox was maybe in the talks at the same time. So I honestly don't know what happened there. Okay. And I do, like, full disclosure, I hated her for an entire year for that. I was like, that bitch stole my job.
Sure.
But obviously that's to no fault of hers.
No, but it's a human reaction. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, like she didn't know that I was also talking to someone about it. And like, I don't know what the conversation was in the back. I don't know what led to which decision. I also don't think that I deserved it any more than she did, obviously. So like, I had no claim to that spot more than anyone else. But back then I was still like, man, that could have been a really sweet gig. And the bigger it got, I got more envious of that as well. I was like, oh man, like getting that full-time kind of gig in a game, you don't have to switch. And I was still like jumping from one game to another, and I really would have loved to like find a home somewhere. So I was very jealous of that, and I unfairly, emotionally, in my head at least, never publicly, let that out on her. I kind of projected that anger on her, but in the end, this is an industry. This is how it works. Some people get hired, and that means other people don't get hired. And now she's the absolute queen of League of Legends, and rightfully so, because she's doing a phenomenal job. So it's good that she got the job, because she's the best fit for it, clearly. And
as you say, you got your own home in Overwatch anyway.
Yeah,
you basically became your League of Legends,
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Right, okay, another thing I want to ask about is, as we're coming towards the end of the interview now, is you had, I think, probably the most crazy, unlucky set of circumstances in 2020 I've ever seen, which is, if everyone will know, obviously everyone was having a hard time and a lot of people had to stay in one place or couldn't travel, but you had, I think, the ultimate shitstorm all at the same time. Like, if people don't remember, you did a twit longer where, like, your dad was ill, you just got married, but you couldn't have like a proper marriage because obviously you had all the restrictions and everything was shut down. And then obviously in the meantime, you've also had a child. So how have you dealt with all this? This seems like that could knock anyone for six. Like how have you managed to bounce back? 'Cause it seems like beyond when you put occasional things out on the internet, like it never seems to bleed into the broadcast or anything, even when you were remote. Like how have you handled it?
It was a crazy year. I mean, the last few years were quite emotional and traumatic in a way, and it did take a lot out of me. I think I'm getting so much energy and joy out of my job that I need my job in order to be able to handle those situations. Some people might think like, no, you want to take your time and you want to rest and take it easy. But I think for a lot of people in our industry, it is the job which gives us that much joy, and it is our job that gives us the energy to like be able to deal with emotional stressors. So for me, it was super important that when all of that happened, so like basically the pandemic hit, my dad nearly died. I wasn't sure if he's going to make it. I got a call from his sister, and I didn't grow up with my parents. I grew up in an orphanage because they lost guardianship over me and my brother. But when I was older, I reconnected with my parents because I wanted to know them better and like have parents, and not like live my life as an orphan. After I got over the initial anger of the whole situation, I think I try to, turn a page and like have a family or at least know them. And so for me to like hear that he's almost dying was obviously really hard. And that news came like in the most inconvenient time. It was right before our playoffs started in the Overwatch League, and then the pandemic hit, so traveling was super restricted, and I knew that.
You had like a visa problem as well, right? Something like that.
Yeah, at the same time my visa was running out. So,
and if people don't know, during that time when we were all online, they weren't issuing visas. You couldn't get one, right?
No, you couldn't, because all the embassies were closed because of the pandemic. So you couldn't get any visa appointments being made. Now my dad is on the verge of dying. My visa is on the verge of running out, which means that if I leave the country, I can't get into an embassy because of the pandemic in order to renew my visa, so I can't come back in. And then on top of that, there is the restrictions of me not being an American. So even if I work here and live here, I can't come back in, even if I have a visa, because of the pandemic. Right. So what we had to do was, instead of postponing our wedding until the pandemic is over, we had to get married in order for me to have family here so that I can come in even if I don't get a visa.
Didn't you also say you did something crazy, like you had to like get married, then immediately leave or something like that, right?
I left the morning after my quote unquote wedding. So we had a wedding. We had to drive out like 3 hours early in the morning to find a place which would still make appointments for us to just sign the papers. We signed the papers, had a quote unquote ceremony with just us and the person ordaining us, which was my husband's cousin, and a makeup artist who did my makeup in the backseat of the truck. So it's just like, I have a few pictures and that was it. No wedding night or anything either, of course, because I had to leave at like 5 in the morning. I packed my bags and I left the next morning, and we still didn't know if that's going to be enough for me to be able to come back into the country. And then I landed in Switzerland. My dad was still in critical health. Because it's a pandemic, I first had to like go in quarantine. So I went to his place, which is in the middle of the Alps. Like nowhere.
I saw some of the pictures. It looks amazing. It looks like a poster.
There is nothing, absolutely nothing. And in the midst of all of that, my incredible colleagues from Blizzard and from the broadcast from OWL wanted to give me space, but as I told you, I told them like I really need this. Like, can I somehow figure out to do this remote? Like, is there a way? Because we did remote broadcast anyway, so just more remote. And they shipped all the equipment out to the Alps in Switzerland. They shipped like streaming equipment, and like they bought new stuff and had it all shipped to this tiny little village where I had to like go up the hill to that one little shed where the post is being dropped off, because they don't drop it off at the houses. And the person who has running a store there, like that lady, she just saw those big containers and was like, the fuck is that? So explained the situation to me, but then also to her. And then I also explained to her like, yeah, but I don't really have internet at my dad's place, who's still in the hospital, who I couldn't see at that point. And then she's like, well, I'm 2 villages further down, but I have internet. You can do it in my living room. And I'm like, okay, complete stranger, mind you. Like, I don't know this woman. She doesn't know me. So she helped me load all the stuff into her tiny little like living room. And then obviously due to the time difference, I then went to her place to broadcast overnight. And that's how I got to broadcast the grand finals that year. With Blizzard support, making it possible for me to like actually do that. And that's the only thing which kept me sane, because I still didn't know if my dad is going to survive what he was going through. I couldn't go and see him still because of the pandemic restrictions, because he was like in the emergency like unit, however you call that, ICU or whatever. So once he was out and then in rehab, he stayed in rehab for a few months, and I wasn't able to leave the country. So I was able to go and visit him now, but I wasn't able to come back home. So I got stuck in Switzerland for almost half a year with like just a tiny suitcase filled with things and nothing else. And I couldn't go back home to my husband. And then eventually when the embassy opened back up, I got that one appointment, and everyone in front of me got shut down and didn't get there. You needed a special approval to go back to the US, because by the pandemic restrictions, they still wouldn't let Switzerland into their country, even if you're married or something. It was only like special something. So you had to like talk your way into it, basically. Now, just to turn out that the person who was at my case, at my little like booth, he looked at it and was like, Blizzard, huh? Is Mike still working there? I'm like, no, Mike is he was a roommate. He was an exchange student. He was a roommate of Mike Morheim. And then he's like, oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, like say hi to him. And then he approved my case for no other reason than him knowing mine.
That sounds so surreal, doesn't it? That's like you were supposed to get back in. Exactly.
Yeah, no. And I was in a completely empty airplane, like 5 months or something after I left my husband behind. I then got to go back home and see him again, that was crazy. Yeah. So that was a fun pandemic.
By the way, as much as I get like everyone was just like doing what they could to get by at that time, at the same time, another famous trope, I don't know if it's the case in yours, is that a lot of women have dreamt of that wedding day, right? And what it's going to be like and what they want. And obviously you must have had to sort of skip all that. Did you actually eventually do like a proper ceremony or something? How were you able to deal with just having sort of like, I mean, it sounds, you almost made it sound like you were in Vegas just looking for a place you could get it done that night because you had to leave, right?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's definitely not how I imagined my wedding day. Like I obviously wanted a real wedding, and I maybe low-key still wanted. I still have a wedding dress, which I never got fitted because there was no... So I got a dress and everything. I just never got to wear it. So that's still here. But now I'm also thinking, I saved a lot of money on that wedding.
That's true.
So we had $5 beer at the gas station afterwards because no restaurant was open. So while I still would love to celebrate with all my friends, I don't really think I need it per se. I'm not of faith, so I don't need that vows before God and whatnot. I wanted to marry my husband because I love him and because I wanted to make that promise in front of him, and that's all that matters. And while my friends couldn't be there, that doesn't make them less excited about me being married to the love of my life. So I don't really think I need it. Plus, all my friends are currently getting married, and I just get invited to one wedding after another. So I just live vicariously through their weddings and don't spend money on it. So I think there's a win, really.
I have to say, even though I've myself been very critical of Blizzard, props to them for actually letting you do it remotely, though, because I have to say that would be even though, look, you could say, like, it might look bad, at the same time, if the person can't even work at the same time zone, they're trapped in another that would be the easiest time ever to be, for any reason, be like, look, sorry, you can't do it, you have to be here, or you have to be on our times or something. So
much money on it. Yeah. And they did not need to do that. I mean, it's the same with, like, me going on maternity leave now. Like, again, I was out for not half the season, but a good chunk of the season. And technically my maternity leave would have extended into the playoffs and the grand finals. And it would have probably been easier for them to just like find someone to like cast for the entire time and not go the back and forth. And then also they have to, of course, like cater to my needs. Like now they need to find a nursing room and like all those things. And they needed to get me new wardrobe because postpartum, my body just looked very different. I didn't fit into my clothes initially. So like they didn't need to go through all those extra steps, but because I told them that it would be very meaningful for me to like be part of the end of the season because I started off the season and it just means a lot to me. They made it work together with me, and they worked around my schedule. Like one day I couldn't come on broadcast because I couldn't find someone to take care of the baby, and they were just like, no, this is fine, like we figured it out. So they were like every step of the way, me working for them, they've been nothing but accommodating and supportive. Like be that me on the other side of the world or me being back here and just catering to my needs. Like they've been very, very nice.
They have a term in American sports, like the American football, the NBA, etc. They call people a lifer when they're someone where like they're just dedicated to that sport. There's going to be like if they have the gig, as long as someone will hire them, there'll always be a coach or a player or referee or whatever. They're just going to do it their whole life. Since you're such an OG in esports, like a lot of people I've noticed, a lot of them don't move between games. They have the one game they originally loved. If they got good enough at it or were good enough for like on-camera skills, they got a gig in it. But even then, sometimes they get burned out on the game they loved, or sometimes, you know, it's cool for a few years, but then eventually they want to do something else. Does the fact you've been in esports for so long, and at the moment you've got quite a stable job to work from and they accommodate you, Sarah, do you see yourself as someone like that? Could you be here in like 20 years in esports still working?
If esports has me. I don't know if they want to see grandma talking about video games, but maybe it'd be funny. I don't know.
Could be pretty unique though.
Exactly. I stick around for as long as I can. Honestly, I have no plan on leaving. I obviously love having the security right now that I do, but being part of the league, because now that I am a mother, I have a child, like I can't go from gig to gig and like do all the traveling shenanigans. I can do some of it, but I can't do it to the same extent I used to. And I also don't want to do it to the same extent I used to. Like I like having health insurance and a steady income and like work hours and stuff like that. That does certainly help me in where I am right now with my life. But if I find and continue to find ways to do just that, be that with Blizzard or someone else, I will not leave, because it's still a hobby of mine. It's not just my work, and it's still my passion. It's made my life worth living in a lot of different aspects. So I have a lot to be thankful for within the gaming space, and I'm not going to leave it, because for me it's part of me and what I do and what I am.
Since, as you say, at the moment, the current plan is to keep doing this, I can ask you as a hypothetical then. Since you've been in so many different games, and you even were briefly in League, like you said there, is there a big esports game or just an esports game over the years that you never did that you actually would have liked to have worked in? Is the one that, like, that's the one that got away?
Well, that's a good question. I think I always wanted to work in kind of fighting games.
Okay.
Because I love fighting games growing up, especially Virtua Fighter. I got to cast it, like, I think once for World Cyber Games. But other than that, I never really got into the scene. I think that the fighting scene is actually a very particular scene. It's also one of the scenes which could potentially get me to work a gig in Japan, which is something I always wanted to do.
Is that a specific location you want to go to, right?
Yeah, I always wanted to have an event in Japan. I was always in awe with Japanese culture, as many gamers are, I guess. Like, there's a lot of overlaps between like those kind of manga and anime and like gaming in a way. So yeah, I also come from a background of just loving manga growing up. That was my biggest passion, still collect them as an adult. And a lot of games they play over there, obviously, they're not really what we play over here. So the esports concept is not really as widespread over there. However, there is arcade gaming and there are fighting games over there. So that's the one thing I thought, if I could get a foot in there, that'd be pretty cool.
Right. I know in the modern day, especially, a lot of nuance gets lost on the internet. People don't seem to fully understand what a metaphor is. So the key thing I'll stress at the beginning of this question is when we use a metaphor, we're only picking like one element perhaps of that thing that is related to the other one. So along these lines, right, it's a weird way to ask it, but I'm going to ask it. Right, if someone didn't know who you, and like, to be fair, like there's an hour and 45 minutes here, so they should know a bit about you now, but let's say they didn't, right? Could you pick out like an esports player over the years where something about either their style or their personality, who would be the best reference point for you? Who would it be you if you were a pro?
Which esports player would be me?
Yeah, who could like represent some key element of you, or what would you be like if you'd been a pro? Which personality type do you think you would be?
That's a really difficult question to answer.
Can be along whatever theme you like. So it could be something about their personality that's cool. Maybe there's something about their style of play. I mean, I'll give you an example. If I did myself, like I am a bit like what I appear on camera. Like I'd probably be like some player in Counter-Strike who's like an entry fragger or something. You know, the guy whose job is just like, you've got to be like super aggressive, just running on the corner, live or die. You haven't got to try. Like, you see what I mean? Like that's sort of an angle to go on. Can you think of one?
Yeah, I guess I'd be a little bit of a troll player. You know,
okay.
So, I kind of the cheesy tactics come, the special tactics come. Like I'd be the white draw of the people. Like I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something along those lines, because I don't think I'm serious enough to like be that hardcore pro gamer or like the successful pro gamer. But I'm also too competitive to not be successful.
Okay.
I think like having fun with it. I don't know. Yeah, so I'd be somewhere there between white draw and the
look, I guess it does fit in with what you said earlier about having imposter syndrome. Like if you were just some like Protoss player, like all in people all the time, you could be like, am I actually good at the game or am I just abusing this element of the game? Like, I guess that fits. I guess there's a theme there. Okay.
Tactics, like, I don't know. I get away with it, I guess.
Okay. By the way, along those lines, I actually think that to tie into that previous topic we talked about, I actually think that is a really healthy thing, though. Like, spoiler, I set it up there like as though veterans, we have to, all of us do that. It's like, I've even heard, by the way, from not only esports pros, but people who are pros in like television and sports stuff. I've heard everyone has those nerves at the beginning of the broadcast, especially the first time after you've been away for a few weeks. Everyone has that like electricity of like, look, if you misinterpret it, that there's a fear of like, fuck, it could go badly. It's like, yeah, but it could also go great, couldn't it? It's like, that's like that feeling of like anything could happen. So what I would say to people is like, I do think that's actually like, I think you should have that. In some ways, it almost shows as well. Like it hasn't become old hat, it hasn't got boring. It's still vibrant to be in esports, right?
No, it means you're still caring. Otherwise, you wouldn't get nervous about it. And I mean, quite frankly, like when people say like, oh, you shouldn't be nervous. Like, no, actually you should. Like, obviously not every broadcast is making or breaking your career, but it is in our position. It's very easy to lose your job over a mistake being made. And those mistakes can happen like way quicker. And I've seen them happen in the past to colleagues, like with no malintent, but it's just sometimes something slips out of your mouth and that was that. And even if there was no malintent, like that's pretty much it. And also you have to keep in mind that like you are what the people see. If everything in the back like goes up in flames, like you still have to keep your calm. Like, and people will shit on you for it, not at the back. So it's, you're kind of taking the punches from every angle, right? So it's a lot of pressure, and it's good and it's healthy and it's normal that pressure gets to you. And hopefully that will make you be better and do better and work harder and focus more, and not make you crumble, because that could of course also happen. But just hope it doesn't.
Along those lines, another thing I've also sort of changed all over the years, I used to think when people said, you know, like you should always feel like super grateful to have your job and all, I used to take it the wrong way and sort of think like, what the hell? Like I worked really hard for this, and I also had to like battle against other people and update myself over the years. And like, but then I realized actually, like if you do it from the perspective of you thinking about like gratitude and stuff, of course, I mean, we all have to be lucky. We all have to have the right people. Like you said earlier in the story, you have to have the right people believe in you or take a chance on you, or sometimes even you have an initial encounter that's bad, but then you get a second chance another way. Like there's a lot to be grateful about. So let me ask you that then. What are you grateful about in esports, and what's been good about esports? Sometimes I do actually, as much as it can be shitty on Twitter and stuff, there are times though in esports where I do pinch myself like, how is this my job? This is ridiculous.
I am super grateful for people who took a chance on me, and I'm not in a way of like, oh, I owe them everything, because, you know, sometimes they just needed someone and I was available, and if I wouldn't have been available, they would have been just as fucked, you know. So it's a give and take from both sides, and I do think that I certainly have added something to the broadcast as well as they have added to my life and my experience by hiring me and giving me the opportunity and a platform. I am definitely super grateful, because I know that I was garbage. I was not good at my job early on. Like that took so many years, and I still have so much to learn and so much to improve on. But I love that there are so many people who can see the potential and still like what I do and hire me in order to give me the opportunity to keep on improving. So that's definitely something I'm grateful for. Every single day I get to do my job. Every time I get hired, I'm grateful for that. Every time someone reaches out about a sponsorship or a gig, like I'm grateful for those opportunities, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have an audience I can share that with. Because, you know, without our audience, I know it's a little annoying. I also sometimes take offense when they're like, we made you, kind of thing, you know, like you wouldn't be anything if you didn't have viewers.
Sure.
Like, I mean, it's true, but it's also offensive. Like, I mean, a barista wouldn't be a barista if no one drank coffee, but he's not gonna like thank
True.
every customer coming in for drinking coffee, right? So but I am grateful. I'm grateful for their support and like a lot of uplifting comments you do get over the years, and a lot of memorable moments you have with people in the community, which make you feel like you belong there, which make you feel like you want to keep on doing that because you can make a difference for other people as well who are watching. So yeah, there's so much to be grateful for. I'm grateful for good colleagues, good peers. I think that really makes and breaks gigs for me. Like having people I love working with who are not just pleasant people, but also really good at their job. I love people who are good at their jobs. It's just such a joy to see people excelling. I love seeing all those colleagues, not just the people in the Overwatch League, but also just peers in the industry. I love seeing them succeed. I love seeing them do well. I love seeing them getting their awards. I love seeing them getting the recognition that they deserve, because, you know, they work so hard and I work so hard, and it feels like almost their achievement is part of my achievement, is an achievement of the whole of the industry. So it gives me a lot of joy and a lot of gratitude.
This might have been covered a little bit by what you said there, but it's just my standard last question. I always ask at the end, do you have a final message, or is anyone you want to thank or say hello to?
It's just be kind, man. just be kind to people. Try to walk in their shoes every once in a while. Not everything is as black and white as you might want to see, or maybe you see it because of, you know, your own experiences, which are totally valid. But there is always something on the other side to explore and to learn. And I think if we all just would be a little more kind, a little bit more open, we could make this an even better space than it already is. I know we shit a lot about the gaming space being so toxic and esports being so toxic and so horrible, but it's also one of the most incredible, wonderful, and loving places. It's a place that I call my home and I got to call family. So I'm grateful for it, and I think we can make it better.
This video was kindly supported by Ahmed Hadju, Hades Good, Matt Pugnatio Rakula, Animosity, Butt Pounder 420, Jensen Gore, Kovacevic, Ord, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Toucan, and as always, special thanks goes out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my upcoming content? Maybe you want to ask a question in my monthly AMA. Would you like teasers to find out who the guests are for upcoming interviews and shows? Maybe you want to take part in one of those lengthy esports discussions with me that can go all over the place. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today, where, in the description box below, there's a Patreon link.